It's 11:03 a.m. on Friday, the 15th of August, 2008. This is Mark Strassman with Utopia News. We're about to speak to Chelsea Sexton, who is the co-founder of Plug in America. Welcome to Utopia News.
Thank you.
We're mainly going to talk right now about some comments that Boone Pickens made on the News Hour with Jim Lehrer on the 11th of August, just Monday of this week. And let me read for you and the audience the dialogue that went on between Ray Suarez, the moderator, and Mr. Pickens. Ray Suarez says, "But instead of building a national grid for distributing natural gas as a fuel to personal transportation, wouldn't it make more sense to keep making electricity with it and just have people plug in their cars?" Mr. Pickens says, "Well, I love the plug-in. That's fine with me, but you can't get to any numbers that way. The other day somebody said, we'll have 1 million cars in the plug-in hybrid in 10 years. We have 250 million cars in the United States, so you can't get to 1 million cars isn't going to do anything for us." What's your take on what he said?
Well, I think he certainly has a limited view based on his own interests and his own perspective from where he is. You know, there are certain applications for which natural gas would be great. It is a relatively clean fuel. It is relatively available. It's not quite as ubiquitous as the grid, but it certainly would have some application in some heavier duty vehicles and those sorts of things. At the same time, we don't have 1 million of those either. And the only way to get to the millions of cars that we need to actually make a difference is to start with the 1 million. So, our particular goal is to try to make choices available to consumers. And the one thing that we know is that consumers do want to drive on cleaner, cheaper, domestic electricity. That doesn't mean that some others don't also want to drive on natural gas. So I don't see it quite as much of an either-or scenario as he does. But I do think a simpler approach is to make it as easy as possible for the consumers to adopt these technologies. And that suggests leaving the natural gas on the grid and charging the cars.
Okay. Could you say something about what you estimate the capabilities are for producing plug-in hybrids and all-electric cars over the next 10 years? Some sort of specific, if not yet precise, figures on how many plug-ins could be on the road in 10 years?
Well, how many plug-ins could be on the road in 10 years is entirely up to our own political and corporate will. It's not an issue of lack of demand. At this point, it's an issue of product availability. So how many cars we have in 10 years is entirely up to how many cars the automakers choose to make. Hopefully, most of them will choose the hundreds of thousands route that companies like GM are talking about, but if they choose to make them in smaller numbers, that will inherently limit the uptake speed. So we've known for 15 years that there's demand for plug-in cars that doesn't necessarily correlate to automakers making them, which really means consumers need to continue to ask for what they want, and our political leaders need to step up a little bit and lead.
Okay, well, I talked to Felix Kramer yesterday at CalCars, and he made the argument that car manufacturers aren't going to be able to create plug-ins as fast as it would be possible to do conversions. What's your take on the relative contributions that could be made by car manufacturers to produce new plug-in vehicles and the number of plug-in vehicles that could be created by doing conversions?
I think that there's far more potential with new vehicles than there is for conversions. There's a place for conversions without question, whether it's pure gasoline cars turned into pure electric or hybrids into plug-in hybrids or gasoline into plug-in hybrids. There are a number of scenarios that people are sort of fascinated by, recently announced, not least by Andy Grove, who Felix is fairly aligned with. At the same time, we need new vehicles with warranties, with service procedures, with infrastructure in place in order to get to the numbers that all of us want to get to. We don't disagree on the goal, but there are multiple paths to get there. And to put all of our eggs in the conversion basket is just as limiting as putting all the eggs in the natural gas basket.
Give our listeners a brief overview of who's going to be coming online when, with what kind of plug-in hybrids and all-electric cars in the next few years.
Well, at this point, there are 6 automakers that have announced pure electric cars of some kind in the next few years. They are Nissan, Renault, Mitsubishi, Subaru, Daimler, and BMW. They range from a 500-car pilot program from BMW to, thousands of cars by some of the other ones. Mitsubishi and Subaru are likely to start in Japan first. Mitsubishi's already announced that they'll start next year in Japan and then hopefully come to the U.S. shortly thereafter, a year or two after, which suggests 2010 to 2012 timeframe. Most of the others are falling in a similar sort of time frame. I think we'll start to see first vehicles in the pure electric vein probably 2010 in numbers thousands and above. On the plug-in hybrid side, or the EREV side, by far GM is still the most aggressive in at least announcements, at least some stuff we can see. And the Saturn Vue plug-in hybrid is scheduled for late '09. The Volt is obviously scheduled for late 2010. And there's certainly speculation that somebody like Toyota might try to come out and beat that. Just because they're quieter doesn't mean they're not working on it. And then there are a few other ones, Mercedes and others, who have talked about different plug-in hybrids but not been as specific on the timing.
Could you explain just a little bit about how the Volt works and how it differs from the Prius?
Sure. The Volt is classically known as a serial plug-in hybrid. GM and a few others have started to rebrand that technology as extended range electric vehicles, or EREVs. And what it basically does is use an electric motor to drive the wheels at all times. So you would plug in it at night, and in this case, for the Volt, you'd have about 40 miles of electric range at the start of the day. And then if you wanted to go beyond those 40 miles, there is an onboard gasoline engine that functions as a generator to recharge the batteries and put the same energy through the motor and drive the car. So the difference between it and a parallel system, which is what's in the Prius, is that the Prius has two complete propulsion systems, one electric and one gasoline, and it sort of toggles back and forth between them depending on the power demand of the vehicle at the time. So at slower speeds around the city, you'd be mostly electric, and then at highway speeds, you'd employ more gasoline with the electric motor supporting. The EREV is actually a simpler system.
So the EREV that the Volt uses always runs on electricity, but sometimes it gets it from the battery, and when that's going to run out, it gets it from the gasoline engine.
Correct.
Okay. Now, all of the proliferation of these electric cars leads one to wonder whether the grid can support them. What's your understanding of how many millions of cars could be charged at night with the existing grid structure and capability for electricity production that we've got now?
Well, I think the most oft-cited study is the one from Pacific Northwest National Labs, and they quote about 180 million plug-in cars could be charged off existing capacity, assuming most people charge at night, which experience tells us they do. People plug in when it's convenient, and it's fairly convenient when your car's sitting in your own garage and you're asleep and you don't care what's happening to it. There will be some daytime charging, and we'll certainly want to try to encourage consumers not to do as much of it if they don't need to. Time of use rates and different things already have been proven to be very effective in that domain. But the reality is most people will charge at night, and we don't need any new power plants of any kind to get this started. 180 million cars is quite a lot. We're just hitting 1 million hybrids after a decade.
All right. Why don't you wrap up by giving us your overview about what you expect the evolving situation for plug-ins to be over the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, without question, we'll probably have a half a dozen or more different choices in the next 3 to 5 years. A lot of that will be dependent on consumer demand, and how quickly and in what numbers will depend largely on political and corporate will. So, it remains incumbent on consumers to continue to call automakers and ask for what they want. We put all of the phone numbers on pluginamerica.org, and also to encourage policymakers to step up and incentivize all of this through policy.
What kind of car do you drive these days?
I drive a Sexton, actually. I'm not buying another car of any kind until I can put a plug on it, or it comes with one already.
Okay, good. Thank you very much for talking to us today on Utopia News.
Thank you.
Bye.